This is going to be a video going over the assembly process of the Edora SMG kit. So you're going to get the gun pretty much like this. You're going to need to provide your HPA engine, your board, your wires for the board, your FCU, your battery, also your inner barrel and bucking. This is a 185 millimeter inner barrel. Anything below a 185 will work good with this compensator. The threaded portion, the threaded barrel, you can obviously put a longer one, but the 185 sits perfectly. You can go a little bit shorter, but obviously you want to max out the inner barrel length. So 185, this is a maple leaf bucking. Try different buckings, GNG, Prometheus, so whatever bucking you want, AUG buckings work. You're gonna get the pack of all the stuff. I'll go over that. You're gonna need a couple of tools. I recommend a razor blade just to have one. Small file, just in case. Bigger file, you shouldn't need the files. The round file you may need. It's a round 8 millimeter file. As long as it's below 8 millimeter, you should be fine. But the 8 works best. You'll see why. And that's pretty much it. So let's dive into the process. Set these tools to the side. Inner barrel. In the pack, you're going to get a few things. So you're going to get a barbed 90-degree fitting. That's for the engine. I recommend doing this because it puts the airline in optimal position. That way when it's tucked in, the airline sits in the stock, and then when it's retracted, it's a good position to attach your airline. So I'll go over that later, but that's what that 90-degree fitting is for. A couple Allen wrenches, one for the smaller ones, one's for the bigger. And you have a couple arms, I'll go over those, and then you have a bunch of engine pins, and I'll go over those when I get to it. So let's go ahead and start taking apart the gun. You got a back pin here, and you got a front one. Go ahead and remove those. When I remove the upper from the lower, I like to grip onto it like this. That way it doesn't want to just fall apart. So back pin, front pin. Back cap should slide right off. You can see I'm like kind of like holding the stock and just pulling it back. That should come right out. And then you have your upper able to split from your lower. As you can see, I'm holding it straight up because there's components in here that possibly could fall out. So when you're removing the upper from the lower, try to do it in a vertical position somewhere around here. If not, these may fall out. We'll go ahead and set the lower off to the side. We'll get to that in a minute. For the upper, slide the Hopup and engine assembly out the back. Set that down. The upper and barrel assembly is pretty simple. Remove these 4 bolts on both sides and the outer barrel will slide out. If you want to swap it with the threaded one I'm including, just make sure the square nuts that are in these little openings on the one that's included, make sure that those don't fall out. If they do, just pop them in. It's easy to remove them straight up. That way those nuts don't fall out. If you remove it like this, you can see they can just slide right out those slots. So if you want to remove this and swap it with this one, just make sure those square nuts are in the new one. And it's pretty simple. Take your inner barrel and make sure it goes through. I double check these, but for whatever reason your inner barrel is bigger, just double check this. If not, take the round file and run it through there a couple of times and you should be all set. So that covers the upper and the outer barrel assembly. Now let's move on to the Hopup and engine clamp. This one's pretty simple. Take your dial and turn it all the way clockwise, as you can see, and it'll stop. Usually it'll line up right around the 1 mark. You see this line here? That'll be right around the 1 where it stops. And then you can remove the dial. This is good practice. Right now, you can honestly remove it at any spot because the arm doesn't have anything to stop it from going maxed over here. Once the inner barrel and bucking's in there, you won't be able to do this. So it's good practice just to, whenever you remove the dial, clamp, and inner barrel assembly, just turn it all the way clockwise, which is off on the Hopup, and then you'll be able to pull the dial out no problem. Next thing you're going to do is remove these 2 bolts on the bottom here, and that'll give you access to the C-clip. Once you get the C-clip out, just make sure these square nuts don't fall out. They shouldn't, but if they do, just pop them back in, get your 2 bolts that you removed. Before we go any further, take a BB and just drop it down the entrance tube and make sure it goes all the way through. Again, I test this, but for whatever reason, if this snags up on your end, just gently file this, sand this, and make sure your BB goes through, no problems. And now we can work on assembling the C-clip and dial and inner barrel. So for the dial, I make the inner diameter a little bit small to accommodate different inner barrels, because you want this a little bit snug on the inner barrel. That way when you're adjusting it, it's not too loose and just spins everywhere. So as you can see, it takes a little bit of force, not a whole bunch, so I can do it with my finger. And that's what you're gonna want with yours. There's a little bit of friction there. So if your inner barrel does not slide through the dial, there's no worries. That's why I say that 8mm file is kind of necessary. Hit it a couple times, spin the dial as you file the inside of it, test your inner barrel. Should be able to push on there, but not too tight. You should be able to turn it with your finger. So do a little finger test. You should be able to turn it. So you want to get it to that point, and once you do, you're ready to install everything. You're gonna take your inner barrel and flip it over to the bottom, the side with the long slot, not the window, so the slot side. Take your C-clip, and the square nuts should face the front of the gun, and simply insert it over the flats on the inner. So it should look something like this with the nuts facing front, and the opening on the C-clip should be on the same side as the window. Now take your dial, small side first. Assuming you follow the last step, it should slide over there. You're gonna line your dial up. There's an opening on the dial. Line that up with the C-clip. That way when you insert it in the Hopup assembly, it should slide in there. You might have to give it a little bit of twist, but as you can see, lines up. Turn the dial a little bit, and then go ahead and insert these screws on the bottom now to lock that C-clip in. A little practice with the C-clip is to assemble this side to side. Just tighten a little bit at a time. That way you're not pulling the C-clip to one side. If the bolts don't want to thread in properly, try pushing the inner barrel all the way in and try tightening them again. It should work. Once you get them tight, check your bucking in the entrance hole. You should see a little bit of it. Drop a BB down there. If I can get it. Drop a BB. Passes through the bucking. If it gets caught up on the lip, I would loosen these up a little bit. Drop a BB down until it catches on the lip. Pull your inner barrel out a little bit until it drops down, and then tighten up these two bolts again. And then your inner barrel and bucking should be in the right position. For the arm, you can see it's got two little indents on it. Included in the package are two more arms, one with a 1 and one with a 3. I think the 2 should work for everyone, but just in case if it's not applying enough hop or too much, 1's going to give you the least amount of hop. So if you put this in and you set it on 0 setting and it's already over hopping, take this out. It's a set screw right here with the smaller Allen wrench. Pop that out, drop it in the 1. Or if you're finding that you're on max hop and it's not really doing enough, go and pop that out and drop the number 3 in. But like I said, I believe number 2 will work just fine. Next up is the engine assembly. So you're going to receive quite a few pins. I have 2 specific ones as of now. So there's one for the backdraft engine, the Phoenix, and then there's one that I made for the jack, because I did some testing on that. I believe the jack and the Phoenix are pretty good. So if you have one of those engines, try one of these pins first and it should get you going. Other than that, I have 7 more pins, each of them numbered 1 through 7, and they will put the engine and nozzle in different lengths as far as front and back. So I'll go over exactly how to figure which one you need out of those. First thing you're going to do, I'm actually going to use this Reaper one because of the grooves a little bit easier to do this on video. Take one of your engine pins and make sure it actually drops inside the groove of the engine, and it should be pretty tight. Once this is pressed in there, kind of hold it. You can see the engine doesn't have much room to go. Make sure you do that first, and then go ahead and insert your engine. You might want to loosen these up first. These kind of just clamp the engine in the back. Loosen those up, should be pretty snug. But insert the engine into the back. For closed bolt engines, I like to start short. As you can see, the nozzle is not touching the bucking. I like to grab a number, so I'm gonna start with a 4. Push this in here, don't push it all the way down. As you're pushing this down, push the engine forward. You might want to give it a little twist as well, and then you should hear it click down. Look to see where the nozzle is. That's pretty close. So with a 4, that's kind of middle of the range. You can go ahead and test this later on Don't worry about this engine pin right now. Try it with number 4. You can snug these back up and then follow the entire process. I'll go over if this does not look proper. So let's say you drop a number 4 in and the nozzle is still too far back. So take your Allen wrench, insert it through the pin, and pull up kind of with 2 fingers like that. Your engine pin should pop right out. If it's too far back, you're going to want to go up numbers. So drop in, let's say, a number 6. Push that engine in there. So without even moving the engine, drop the 6. Now same process. You're going to push forward with the engine. You hear it drop in. The engine moved ever so slightly forward, and that should put the nozzle a little bit further forward. Again, drop this in there. Make sure it's in all the way. There you go. Tighten these back up, test it, make sure it's working. If the nozzle's too far forward, pop this engine pin back out and go down numbers. The further down you go, the further back the engine goes. The higher the number, the further forward the engine sits. So for open bolt engines, it's a little bit easier, I believe. So this jack here, loosen up these, slide this in place. So for open bolt engines, I like to go past where they need to go. You can see the nozzle sitting there. I like to take another BB, drop it in there. You can see it's catching on the nozzle right now. I'm gonna take this jack pin, insert it. You wanna line up the little boss as centered as possible. And then same thing, insert the pin. These are a little bit tricky, but kind of twist, pull, and it should go. You actually heard the BB drop ever so slightly before the engine pin, which is good. The BB should drop as you pull the open bolt engines back. That way you know the nozzle's not too far forward. You can see the nozzle's kind of right there at the entrance where you want it to be. If for some reason you're using the jack and you're putting the jack pin in there and you find that the nozzle's too far back, no worries, take the jack one out and just use one of the standard 7. So 5, put the 5 in there. 5 dropped in there. Move the nozzle a little bit further forward. You can go up to 7 if you really want to, but I believe 7's too far with the jack. You know, it would help if you put the engine pin in the right way. So 7. There we go, 7 drops in. And the nozzle actually sticks in. And I think if you drop one, yep, gets caught on the nozzle. So 7's too far with this one. So it's gonna take some figuring out, drop BBs in there. And honestly, this isn't that hard to take apart when you put the gun together. So I say try one of the middle numbers first, test the gun out. I'll go over the process of testing and troubleshooting. So get this set up, get your pin in there and snug these down. We'll go ahead and move on to the next step. Before we actually go any further, I forgot to mention you can test the Hopup at this point. So more hop is down, so you can go, as you can see the numbers go higher as you turn. Test your Hopup. You should be able to see the bucking, press down. Should be able to test everything now. If it looks good, move forward with putting the engine in. If not, swap this out, but you can check this before you put the engine in. So check it, now assemble the engine and the pins. Lock in there, snug these down. They don't have to be super tight. If you want to put a drop of blue Loctite on the inside of these, it's not going to hurt anything, probably be a little bit better. But snug them down, make sure the engine's not going anywhere, and you're set. So go ahead and take this and slide it into the upper. Inner barrel should enter the outer first, and then everything else back here should line up. There's grooves and should slide right in. Shouldn't be much force to slide this in. So That is your upper. Now let's go ahead and move on to the lower assembly. For the lower, you're going to go ahead and take your trigger board. Make sure that the screw that's already attached in there, so the one behind this linkage here, remove that, and make sure it drops through the opening in the board that you use for the screw normally. If not, this is where the X-Acto blade comes in. I wouldn't drill this out, you might damage the board. So just take your X-Acto and kind of just clean up that inside a little bit until this goes. It shouldn't be much material at all. You could kind of sand the outside of this bolt if you wanted to, or if it's kind of wanting to go, you can thread this bolt in there, and then once it stops, if you keep going, it'll eventually just rip out whatever threads this made. So I recommend just getting it to a point where it goes. It doesn't take much. Just take your X-Acto and just go around the inside, and your bolt should drop right through there. Once you know that your board's set, I would recommend testing all of your electronics before you go any further. So plug your board into your engine, your FCU, plug a battery in, and just make sure that everything works. That way, if something doesn't work later on, you kind of rule out that it's the electronics and the HPA stuff, and you can focus on the kit. I would test that out before we move any further, but remove the spring here. I use a small Allen wrench and kind of pry it out and pull the trigger linkage out, and then go ahead and install your board. So remove this back one here, put the board in, and then tighten it back down. This is how the board should set in there. The screw actually goes all the way through to another square nut. So if you have the gun like this and you're trying to put the board in, that nut's probably gonna fall out. So as long as it's vertical or like this, that nut's not gonna fall out. So when you put the board in, just make sure that nut's in the right spot and that bolt should thread in there. To adjust the trigger linkage, there's a set screw up here. And what that does is changes the position of where the trigger linkage starts. So recommended that you insert angled like this and push it forward as you're pushing on the front of it down. Reason for that is the little tab for activating the switch back here. That's a tiny little piece. If you try to insert it straight down like so, and you press down on it, you can see that link does not clear it all the way. You could possibly damage that. So what I do is insert it from the back first, kind of angled, push forward. As you push the front, it'll activate the switch a little bit, but that's no big deal. And then your trigger linkage should drop down, and then we can go ahead and adjust where this sits. So stock position, that screw shouldn't really be pushing this linkage any further than the trigger itself. So what you can do is plug in everything that you need to operate the kit. You don't really need air, you just need a battery, and move this linkage forward until you can hear it activate the board. Let's say it's right here. You can see that it's got a little bit of a gap. So what you're gonna do is take the linkage back out, back that screw out, so lefty-loosey, until you see that screw come out a little bit, and then test this again. And then let's say it starts here. If you push it and it activates, you're good. Or if you're inserting the linkage and it activates, and then you get in position and you push this forward and it doesn't activate again, you've gone too far out. So you're gonna wanna tighten it back in. So just try to get this linkage to the spot where if it moves a little bit, it activates the board. And it's just going to take fine tuning along with the trigger distance travel, which I'll go over in a second. Try to get this in the right spot. So it should move ever so slightly, activate the board, and you should be set. So with the linkage in the correct spot, you can go ahead and insert that spring. This is a pretty stiff spring, so if you want to swap it out with a lighter one, go ahead, by all means. You can go ahead and test the trigger now. Just hold on to the top of the linkage. That way you get proper engagement. You should be able to see. And at this point, your board should activate your engine and all that. You should be able to hear it. If not, two reasons: it's too far or too out. So if you're inserting this linkage and it activates the board, but then when you pull the trigger, it doesn't activate, you know your linkage is too far forward and you need to screw that screw further in. And vice versa, if you're putting this on, it doesn't activate, and then when you pull the trigger, it doesn't activate, you know your linkage needs to go further out. So back that screw out and keep testing it. The safety is activated through the bottom here. Same thing with the full auto. So forward is not safe and back is safe, obviously. So as you can see, if you don't have any pressure on the linkage here, it wants to kind of fly up. Once you have everything assembled, it's not going to do that. You can see there's a magnet right here, and that's for the fake trigger brake. So there's a steel bolt on the trigger itself. So when you pull the trigger, it moves down away from that magnet. You don't need that magnet in there. I think it feels better. So it's all personal preference. If you want to take that out, remove the trigger guard with this one bolt here, slide the trigger guard out, and then remove the one set screw for the trigger, pull that out, and then you can pop that magnet out through the top. But that's all just personal preference. You can swap it out with a thinner magnet for less of a break, but I think it feels pretty good as it is now. Not too bad. You can see the trigger pull that is adjusted by the set screw here. Right now I have it pretty far out and it's a lengthy trigger pull. If you want to adjust it to a shorter trigger pull, take your small wrench and thread that screw in. That'll make it hit the body quicker and give you a shorter pull, but that's all adjustable up to your preference. Once you get everything where you think is in a good spot, you can go ahead and tuck your FCU, battery, all of that where you think it needs to be. So this is a Polar Star system with Polar Star board, Polar Star FCU, a little mini LiPo. This is how I have everything tucked in right now. The LiPo is like this. You can see the FCU kind of sits under the side. The wires start from the board and run back, loop around, and then it's got room for the little mini LiPo here. As long as you have room for your connectors to come out and your solenoid wire, you should be all set. If you need to run the wires out the back for whatever reason, if this doesn't fit, this little cap here is removable and you can tuck the wires on the left or right or the bottom of this cap. So Polar Star stuff, I didn't have an issue. With the backdraft, I actually had to run the cable out the middle and then on one of the sides because this cable doesn't really like to bend. As long as your stock closes, it's not an issue. So for the backdraft one, I ran out the back. Or if you have other systems, you need to run the wires out the back and then back through, you can. That's what that cap is for. It's probably going to take a little bit of messing around with to get all the wires exactly how you want, running them, fitting the FCU and all that. But once you get it set, you can go ahead and take your upper and fit it over top of it. There we go. And without much force, it should be able to close. Like, I don't take much force to make sure that this gap closes. This is where that elbow comes in. I recommend putting this that way when you run your stock, it closes over this, because if not, it's going to run your line out and it's going to try to kink it. It's possible, but I recommend putting this elbow on there. To figure out where you want to cut your tubing, just put a stock piece of tubing on there a little bit longer. Mark basically where this little angle ends right here and cut the tubing, as you can see, and that should put it in the correct spot to run your fitting down here. And then this is just obviously your standard QD fitting. So tubing, 90, QD fitting, nothing special. From here, just make sure you can plug in your engine like so, and then plug in your battery. I'm not gonna do it right now, but plug in your battery and make sure your wires are kind of tucked out of the way once you can do so. Take your back cap, slide it on. There's little grooves for the cap and lower to slide on. You shouldn't feel much resistance. If you do, you know you're snagging on wires or something, or your engine. So push that cap all the way forward. You can see it was nice and smooth. I don't have any wires hanging out, no wires pinched, nice and smooth. And then take your pins. You can see from the beginning of the video, I know I'm doing this kind of awkwardly right now, but holding the upper and the lower together as I'm doing this, back pin, front pin should go on there, and you are set. I've somehow ended up swapping lowers out of all this, so the stock, it's pretty simple to install. Back two openings with the rods. Once it catches, push the little tab over here to allow the stock to go in. It should lock all the way in, snug. To retract it, push it down, pull out, and then it should lock again. If you do it too quick, you might rip the stock out, but if you do it within a decent amount, it shouldn't come out. But if it does, it's no big deal. Just insert the stock again. Just try not to pull it out as fast. And now you're all set. So now with everything all together, you can fully test your semi, full auto. I actually included a heat insert here, so if you want to semi-lock it, you can. So once the gun is in semi, you can insert a screw here, and that'll prevent you from going to full auto, which is back. So there's a potential semi-lock there. Full auto, semi, and then your safety. So safe, X, and then not safe. So go ahead and test the gun out. I will have a Discord up for troubleshooting, but following this video, you should be able to tell if something's wrong with the trigger linkage or your trigger travel. You should be able to adjust those and get the board and engine to activate properly. You should be able to test everything now. If it's not firing, I would recommend pulling the back cap and pull that Hopup assembly and drop the engine pin down 1 or 2 and then reassemble and test again. If it's not firing, your nozzle's probably too far forward. So I hope this video was informative, and I hope you guys enjoy the kit. I'm open to feedback and suggestions, and if there's any issues at all, I will definitely help you guys and work through it. So you saw the Discord on the bag that you got the hardware in. Join that. I'll be answering questions. You'll be able to see everyone else's thoughts and issues. So thank you guys, and enjoy the kit.